recording now.
Okay.
And you can introduce Eva.
All right. So good evening. I hope everybody's enjoying the spring weather, even if we are supposed to be staying at home. My name's Grant Baines, and I'm the president of the Uxbridge Genealogy Group. And I'd like to welcome our guests tonight, members of the Durham region of the OGS, and we hope you enjoy tonight's joint meeting. I'd like to thank Nancy Trimble for helping to coordinate this joint meeting and facilitating the use of Zoom. Tonight's topic came about earlier this year when one of our members inquired about researching in Eastern Europe. She'd done some work there and was feeling frustrated at locating appropriate resources. We, and I'm not going to lay any claim to this, were able to locate Eva, who has done considerable amount of work with Eastern European research. After some back and forth and in consultation with the Durham OGS, we are able to have Eva present her work twice. Tonight will be an introduction to researching in Eastern Europe, and a second presentation this fall will dig deeper into Eastern Europe. That presentation will be hosted by the Durham OGS. To members of the Uxbridge group, we're doing things a little differently tonight. We've turned off the use of your camera and we have muted your mic. I understand this is the norm for the meetings and presentations at Durham OGS. If you have a question, please type it into the chat and we'll read them at the end of the presentation so all can hear and Eva can respond at that time. Eva has made available some resources and these will be downloadable from the chat or directly from me via email later. Now, Eva Kuchiwa was born in South Africa from German immigrant parents and has always been interested in her ancestors. She specializes in German, South African, and Eastern European genealogy with 30 years of research and learning in genealogy. Currently, she is a member of Ontario Ancestors Eastern European Special Interest Group and many other societies. Eva has given many presentations to great reviews. Eva, welcome, and thank you to agreeing to come in at such a late hour for you.
Most welcome, not a problem. Right, I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope this works now. And start the presentation. Right, so you should be seeing a brick wall now. If you're not seeing a brick wall, we've got a problem.
You're good.
Right. Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. We've got a lot of information to cover. So if we can keep the questions towards the end or put them in the chat, I would appreciate it. And then I hope that this will help you with your research. Also, please feel free to contact me afterwards if you've got any questions. So Eastern Europe is huge and there's no consensus on what precise area it actually covers. Me personally, I just think it's a huge sweep of terrain that is bursting with culture and history. Even though the geographical boundaries in Europe are defined, the boundary between the East and West is not really geographical, but more of a cultural, historical, and religious border. Ancient kingdoms thrived throughout Eastern Europe and was constantly changing right up until the last century. It was the Romans that started the division of the continent from Europe into East and West. As they expanded, taking over new areas, the cultural and linguistic divisions started appearing between the mainly Greek-speaking Eastern areas and the Western areas which adopted the Latin language from them. This east-west rift was gradual and it did take many centuries, but it did become official in the 11th century and still exists today, dividing Christianity in Europe and also the rest of the world into Western and Eastern Christianity. Known as the Great Schism of 1054 AD, it happened because of an argument between the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII, that we ended up with the Roman Catholic and Protestant churches in the West and the Eastern Orthodox churches in the East. Incidentally, these Orthodox churches, also known as Greek Orthodox, Greek Catholic, Romanian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and Roman Catholic. So let's quickly cover the earlier history as a background to Eastern Europe. Throughout the 1200s, there were many Mongol invasions. Poland, the Czech lands, even as far as Austria. This made boundaries more erratic than stable. So you might have some Mongol in you. These ferocious Mongols, as we think of them, I mean, who doesn't think of them as ferocious, created one of the most peaceful periods in history. It's known as the Pax Mongolica and took place in the 13th and 14th centuries, after all of their conquesting, of course. In the west, we had the Roman Empire, and in the east, the Byzantine Empire. While the Roman Empire crashed in the early Middle Ages, the Byzantine Empire managed to carry on for another 1,000 years and was eventually conquered by the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century. Eastern Europe experienced a golden age during the late 16th and 17th centuries. From 1772 to 1795, the Partitioning of Poland happened, which displaced sovereign Poland and Lithuania for 123 years. These partitions were led by the empires of Russia, Prussia, and Habsburg Austria, and they divided the country into three. There were also countless little wars and battles and rebellions throughout the 18th and 19th century. And after all these little wars had effects on the land, the people, and the culture, we got to World War I. World War I managed to break apart the empires with the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Poland was reconstituted, new countries emerged from the ruins, such as Estonia, Latvia, Ukraine, to mention a few. Austria-Hungary had her boundaries reduced, Romania and Bulgaria became independent. Except for Finland and Czechoslovakia, all the other countries became democratic in the 1920s. Unfortunately, it was short-lived due to the depression of the 1930s, and autocratic and single-party states emerged. Then we got to World War II. Many of these new countries could not stand up against Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. They crumbled and were taken over during the war. It is very important to take into consideration the ever-changing boundaries of Eastern Europe when researching your ancestry. How do boundaries affect our research? One of the main names would be the name of the town or village. For example, I was researching for Ragnit, which is where one of my great-great-grandfathers was born. It was Prussian in those days, and I was looking for it and couldn't find it. I eventually found a town called Niemen, which is now in Russia, but it used to belong to Lithuania and was known as Regain. So the Polish, also known as Ragnit, the Lithuanians as Regain, and the Russians as Niemen. So you can see how the change in the name over the years was when he was born in the 1800s, it was Ragnit, it then went to Regain, and then it went to Niemen. It's interesting to see how the Eastern European area evolved through the various empires and kingdoms over the last 5 centuries. There's also a good YouTube video, I think it might be on one of my handouts with the links, which shows you the changes of Eastern Europe on a map and how it goes through. 84% of Eastern Europe are Christian, and the Eastern Orthodox denomination is particularly prevalent, especially in Moldova, Romania, Montenegro, Serbia, and Bulgaria. In countries, specifically Poland, Lithuania, Slovakia, and also Hungary, Catholicism is the most popular denomination. After World War II, many of the countries in Eastern Europe, due to the strength of Russia, adopted communism and the Cold War started. Officially, they were independent from the Soviet Union, but in all honesty, they might as well have belonged to her for all sense of purposes, except for maybe Yugoslavia and Albania, and to some extent Romania. Although they adopted communism, they still stood on their own. Germany, too, was divided into East and West. The Red Army took over the control of the interior ministries and then proceeded to slowly but surely take over farmlands, mass media, church groups, trade unions, private businesses, and civic organizations. And then, of course, the horror began in large-scale ethnic cleansing. During this time, many people escaped and looked for better opportunities in North America. In 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall marks the beginning of the fall of the Iron Curtain. The whole political landscape of Eastern Europe changed, and many of the nations that had been controlled by Russia regained their independence. Many of them have joined the European Union. So, where do we start? All genealogists, and I'm sure all of you know this, will tell you to start with yourself. And I'm sure you've done that. When you get to Eastern Europe, the most important detail is to locate the ancestral hometown before you do anything else. Once you know the birthplace, even a former residence of an ancestor, you can identify the records you need to be searching for. So where would you look for this elusive village? This could be found in a variety of places, such as death certificates, obituaries, burial registers, marriage records, naturalization records, passengers lists, etc. Note that the census records show them in rare instances, usually only the country is shown. People were on the move even back then, so your grandmother's place of birth might have been Osterna in Hungary, but the passenger list shows as the last place of residence is Pilsen in Czechoslovakia. She might have left Hungary and resided in Czechoslovakia for a while before leaving for North America. It is really important to do a reasonably comprehensive research. The minimum identification that I believe that you need to be able to confirm and do further research would be the ancestor's original name, what they were known as back in the home country. Many changed their names on arriving in the New World. For example, Johann changed his name to John. Remember that many of the immigrants were illiterate and some unwillingly had their name anglicized. Others changed their names on purpose to be more anglicized to fit in when they arrived. The date of an event, preferably a birth or marriage in the old country, as well as their religion, is really important, and obviously the place, town or village where the event took place. With this crucial information, you should be able to ensure that you are searching the correct ancestor and records. And then the last one is my acronym of FANS. Well, it's everybody's acronym, sorry. Friends, associates, and neighbors play an important role in immigration. I add an S onto it for siblings, because I sometimes find that we overlook siblings. Often your ancestors would have traveled with friends or family from the same village to the new country. Census records might provide further information, as neighbors could be an in-law, fellow passengers could be related to or from the same time. Godparents, witnesses to marriages, all can help point to the correct ancestor. Note that on census records, don't look on just one page, look on the page before that and the page after, because family could be living just down the road or on the next block. Roadmap. We've gone through the kind of information that we need to start searching your ancestors. It's also important to have a basic research plan. It helps you keep you on track. You don't want to end up going down pink roads, as I call them. And I'll tell you why. Many years back, my sister and I were driving to visit our Auntie Pam in Bethlehem, South Africa. In those days, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have GPS, so you can imagine it was a long time ago. We used a standard road map and we got horribly lost. My sister was the navigator. My sister kept on directing me down this road and it was non-existent. So I stopped, looked close on the map, and when we went to the legend, we realized that it was a pink road, which meant that it had not been built yet. Needless to say, we got there, but 3 hours later. So planning, a good thing to do. A simple plan that I use is the known facts. What information do I have? Birth, marriage, occupation, witnesses, my hypothesis. What is fact and what is potential fiction? My objective, to find my great-grandmother's death or to go back another generation, to gain insight of why they left. My identified sources are any primary and secondary evidence that I have, and the strategy, where do I start? Where will you need to research? I think this is everybody's biggest question is, where do I start? Church or vital records? Are there any census records? Did they own land? What was their occupation? What are you missing? What do you still need to complete the ancestor's profile? Research log, just a simple form what you've already researched. It's very important to keep track of what you've researched because you don't want to do what I've done, and I've gone to the Family History Center often, and I've often researched the same 3 films in Bischofsburg because I didn't write down what I was researching. Once I started writing it down, I realized what I was doing. Okay, before I go to the next slide, I want you to think of how you would spell the name Pechel. Imagine you, the customs officer, and I'm the immigrant, and I'm telling you that I'm Eva Pechel. What is in a name? Yes, there are thousands of ways of spelling names. As we know, names were often changed, and due to being illiterate, names were written down differently, and this is where creativity needs to be applied. Some tips when searching. Use wildcards. A wildcard for a letter in the name. So, for example, P wildcard SCHEL, for example. Don't put in all the information you have. Just input the names and see what your results are. As a fellow genie, Kirsty always tells me less is more. Don't use the exact field in the search engine. Use the sounds like or the similar settings. Once you find information, you can start narrowing it down. Be creative and keep on going. At the moment, I'm looking for a customer for mine for Celar, which is C-E-L-A-R. I'm looking under the C's, under the K's, and also under the Z's or the Z's. So if you're Canadian, it's a Z, and if you're an American, it's a Z. So it's important also to know the naming traditions, as this could affect your ancestors. Nowadays, it's not so important to name your children after family members, but in the past it was. During the communist regime of the Eastern Bloc in some countries, babies were not allowed to be given foreign names, except for a few exceptions for actual foreign people or Jewish people. In Czechoslovakia, they had to choose a name from a baby's name calendar. So each day had a name or more names listed, and dependent on the day of the baby's birth, they had to take that name, or if there was a list to choose from one of them, they couldn't name them what they wanted. In Hungary, the sources for the names saints, kings, and queens of earlier dynasties. In Poland, saints' names were the most popular names, and they have an unusual custom of celebrating their birthday on the next saint's day. So, for example, Maria, who was born on January the 28th, would celebrate on February the 2nd, which is St. Mary's Day, on the Catholic calendar. In Romania, before the communist occupations, religious names, especially saint names, were popular, particularly in the countryside. However, when the communists were in power, names tended to be more historical. For example, the names of past Romanian kings were very popular. Ukraine names were often saint names from the Greek Bible. Also, many Germans lived in many of the Eastern European countries, and they have various traditions that you need to be aware of. And I've also found out that it wasn't only the Germans that had these traditions. These traditions are found all over the place. So the main naming tradition was what I call the cherished way, is a pattern of firstborn son for father's father, second-born son, mother's father, third-born son, father of the child. The same patterns for daughters, but using on the mother's side. So why oh why are two boys called Peter? Often a name for a child that had died earlier would be reused for another child. I've also come across where all the boys had the same first name as their father, but their middle name differed. This started in the Middle Ages, where boys were baptized. For example, all the boys were John and the girls with Maria as the first name. This is to honor a favorite saint of theirs. And then the second name being the one that they used in daily life. So it would be John Peter, so they would know him as Peter. It would be John Brian, and the next one would be Brian. It's also a tradition of naming the children after the godparents. So it's very important to check those witnesses. I've just mentioned a couple of traditions, and let me tell you, there are more. I just want to go over the Jewish folk. They arrived in Europe before the Romanians and lived throughout Europe. They were constantly under persecution. I won't go into details as there were just too many of them. Jewish people were expelled from various countries throughout Europe. Many fled to Poland and the Eastern Europe. During the 19th century, they were forced to practice the Christian religion, were separated from their families and forced to live in designated areas. The Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe was where they were allowed to live, but life in the shtetls was hard and they were racked with poverty. Over 2 million Jewish folk alone immigrated from the Pale to other countries, mainly North America, before World War I. There is a difference between the Ashkenazi Jews from Central and Eastern Europe and the Sephardic Jews of Iberia, which is Spain, as well as the Mitzrai, who remained in the Middle East. With regards to the naming traditions of the Jewish, the Ashkenazi Jews do not name their babies for living people, only dead people, but the Sephardic Jews often name their children after living relatives. The majority of Jewish people and people who have Jewish DNA in North America descend from the Ashkenazi, as they immigrated during the 18 and 1900s. So if you ever do have your DNA test done and you have some Jewish in you, they will divide it into these three categories. Research. So what kind of sources are available to our research? I'm sure you're all sitting and thinking, we're getting to the nitty-gritty here. Right. Church and synagogue records. Church registration began in the late 1500s. It was sporadic. Only by the mid to late 1600s did it become more consistent. By the 1800s, there were laws that required most churches to keep records in specific formats and to make transcripts for the civil government. In many cases, these laws required that people of other faiths be also recorded in the Catholic Church records. So that means if you're looking for a Protestant record or an Orthodox record, it might be in the Catholic Church record as well, due to the fact that the Catholic Church was the most predominant religion. Jewish people were also required to keep birth, marriage, and death records. The later records generally give you more complete information than the earlier ones. The laws regarding vital records varied depending on the empire or the country that had jurisdiction. Baptism, marriages, and deaths were recorded in the church or synagogue to which the person belonged. Note that for most marriages, if the couple came from different parishes, that the norm is to be married in the woman's parish, so that you would most probably find the record there. On the odd occasion, I have seen that the record of the marriage would be added to the man's parish at a later date, but they've usually squished it between two other records so that it's in the right date range. Your ancestors might not have had a church or a synagogue, and they would have had gone to the nearest village that did have one, known usually as the mother church. Sometimes there would be a small church in the village, but the records would be kept at the mother church. Use maps or gazetteers to locate surrounding villages where the church or synagogues could have been. Many records pertaining to the Jewish side of life were destroyed during the Holocaust. We've got Yitzhak books that are memorial books that are a tribute to all the people who were murdered in World War II. Most of these books are in Yiddish or in Hebrew. These books are important to genealogists who have Jewish ancestors. They have detailed maps, photographs, and illustrations which can be helpful. So which denomination are they really? This is my grandmother's birth certificate. The first one, the grey one, is when she was born in, she was born in 1900, but the certificate was issued in 1903 in Hungary. It's a Hungarian birth certificate, and it shows her parents to be Greek Catholic. However, on the Romanian document, which was issued in 1926, that she had to prove that she was Romanian and not Jewish, shows her and her parents as Greek Orthodox. My great-grandmother Eva's birth certificate shows her and her parents to be Greek Orthodox, while my great-grandfather Vasiliety shows that they're Orthodox Romanian. So I've done my DNA. I've got a lot of Southern and Eastern Europe, so I must be a bit Greekish, Romanish, Hungarian, just a mongrel mutt, really. So let's look at Canada first, because this is where we need to start before we go back to Eastern Europe. A little bit of history. By 1867, when Canada became a confederation of colonies, there was a resistance to a powerful central government. Local and provincial governments therefore handled the vital statistics. Oh, by the way, in the rest of the world, vital statistics are actually a woman's chest, waist, and hip measurements. Only in North America are vital statistics birth, marriage, and death records. So, for example, at the Ontario records, you can find birth registrations and indexes on microfilm ranging from 1869 to 1917. Something to bear in mind is that birth registrations and indexes will not be transferred to the archives until 104 years after the year of registration. So 1918 birth records will only be transferred in 2023. The Archives Ontario also hold records from the Toronto and Kingston immigration offices. However, they primarily document immigrants who received financial assistance. They also have microfilm copies of the federal passenger lists. Moving over to Eastern Europe, did you know that we actually owe Napoleon a great debt of gratitude? He would really enjoy that. He'd be rolling in his grave. As he conquered, so he imposed a civil government in charge of recording births, marriages, and deaths, starting in 1792 in France. Poland and Slovenia were two countries that were affected and started registering in 1808 and 1812. In most other cases, registration did not begin until the late 1800s. For some countries, there will be census records or military records. It's helpful to know who kept the records, under what government and which modern country, or which countries may be holding the records today. In Family Search, there are many records that are available. There's a list of which records they have, and it is definitely worthwhile to review the list first before starting your searches. I've spent hours and hours researching my Romanian ancestors and never found anything. If I'd looked at the list, I would have seen that there were no records for that archive. Gazetteers. Gazetteers are very important to use when doing family history research. They not only help you pinpoint a specific place, but also show you to which jurisdiction the village or town belonged. They also provide interesting facts about the community and help you to know where to look for additional records. For example, from Myers Arts, which is the gazetteer that was done over the Prussian Empire, you may learn about the size of a town, if there was a post office, where the nearest train station was located, and where the civil registration office was located. Often gazetteers will indicate where various records are kept. For example, the gazetteer may tell you that the parish for your ancestor's birthplace and also which town kept the parish records. Gazetteers vary in content. Before you look for a place in a gazetteer, make sure you understand what information is given and the order into which it is given. Most gazetteers include a section describing the information and organization at the front of the book. Not like me, I go and find the town that I'm looking for and then have to scroll all the way back to the front of the book to find out what it all means. The database for the Myers Geographical and Commercial Gazetteer of the German Empire was compiled in 1912. It is online, it is in English and in German, as you can see. It's been transcribed by some volunteers, and it is the gazetteer to use if you are going to Prussia before World War I, the German Empire. Some examples of other gazetteers include, okay, now bear with me while I try to pronounce these names. Słownik Biografii Królestwa Polskiego, which is Poland and surrounding territories such as Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine, and Magorov Sak Hejszak Nefestra Katko Treten, which is the Hungarian gazetteer. I apologize to anybody who speaks Slovenian or Hungarian if I pronounce those horribly. All these gazetteers are available through Family History Library, although I must point out that the ones that I've looked at have not been indexed and are still in book format. Check with your local library if they can help you. There are some that are online, they haven't been indexed or anything, and you'll have to scroll through and read it. They will be written in the local languages. In Eastern Europe, most residents were members of a single denomination, either Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Lutheran, or Greek Catholic. In those locations where the population was divided among two or more faiths, the researcher must know the religion of the ancestor in order to find the correct records. Sprechen Sie Deutsch für beste Germane. Oops. I don't know how to go back, but anyway. Depending on the period of time, the language used in the records will differ. For example, Estonian records are in Estonia, Russian, or German. Latvian records are mostly in Russian, German, and Latvian. Jewish records are more often than not in Hebrew or Yiddish. So how do we read these records? All I can say from experience is it does get easier with time. You will learn what certain words mean, and you will get the gist of the record, unless someone has written it in a long paragraph, which does happen sometimes, especially if a minister deems it necessary to insert the life story of that person. I once found a record that basically advised who was thought to be the father of the illegitimate child. Personally, I found that to be pure gold for some descendants. How do you read a record in a foreign language? With great patience. So we get to the slide now. I'm sure that you're all familiar with the chicken scratchings that one finds in looking at old records. Splashes of ink, blotting out names that might be just the one that you're looking for, or faint handwriting because they were running out of ink. The dilemmas of the world of writing. Reading what these people wrote sometimes is even more challenging than actually finding the record. At Family Search, they have really good videos and tools in the research wiki to help you read the different writings. With the Russian alphabet, you have the Cyrillic and handwritten documents. I've given you a link in your handout for a lesson in reading Russian handwritten records. But here's an example. Look how differently the Russian D is in the middle line. Having a sheet in front of you with the alphabet while reading, or should I say deciphering, a record will be an immense help and save you time. The German handwriting is just as difficult. I mean, really, they have 5 ways of writing the capital A, 5 different types of writing. And then everyone has a unique way of writing. Some as clear as a cloudless sky, and others as murky as a muddy pond. The main tip I have here is to be patient. Take a photograph of the record, then you can enlarge it or reduce it. You can change the color of it. Sometimes I find that if I change a photograph to with a blue tone, the writing is easier to read. Then transcribe it when you have time. There are also many Facebook groups where people are more than willing to help you decipher a couple of words or even transcribe a whole document for you. If you want practice, you can go and index records at Family Search. If you need to know more about that, contact me. Some other tips for when you're transcribing. Take it slow. Make sure that the words are making sense. Find other words in the documents that you can read and use the letters in those words to piece together the letter in the words you can't read. Remember that spelling was not necessarily as important back then as it is now. And the way a person pronounces a word is the way it was written down. Look at adjoining records. The words might be clearer to read them than on yours. Lastly, it's best not to assume anything. Immigration records. Before 1855, there was no official point or any formal regulations concerning immigration. In the US, immigration started being recorded in 1875, and not for our sake, but more for control of the populations coming into the country. In 1875, the US moved to preserve the white racial character of the country and started restricting entry to people of color. Canada started in 1869 to have laws and rules governing immigrants. During the 19th century, it was largely an open-door policy, but this moved to putting more restrictive measures in place. Ellis Island, New York, was the main port for immigration and is a good place to start. But your ancestors might have come through Baltimore, Boston, San Francisco, Montreal, Halifax, and various other places. Search Castle Garden records if your ancestors came via the US. They hold lists from 1820 to 1913. In 1803, British Parliament enacted legislation to regulate vessels carrying immigrants to New York. Unfortunately, only a few have survived for immigrants arriving before 1865. Over 23 million people immigrated through the port of New York. For Canada, you can find immigration passengers lists from 1865 to 1922 at Libraries and Archives Canada. Family Search Wiki provides several important sources for finding information about these immigrants through their articles. The United States Immigration and Immigration. These nationwide sources include many references to people who settled in New York. In addition, the Tracing Immigrant Origins Wiki article introduces the principles, search strategies, and additional record types you can use to identify an immigrant's ancestral or original hometown. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I found some lemons, some nuts, and a bad apple. Right, now we start on the various countries. So in ancient time, Bulgaria was rather cosmopolitan in that it had Thracians, ancient Greeks, Persians, Celts, Romans, Goths, Alans, and not the Allan clan from Scotland, and Huns in that area. In 681, the First Empire rose and dominated the Balkans. In the late 1800s, the Russo-Turkish War led to the formation of the Third Empire. In 1946, it became a one-party state, and in 1989, democracy began. The Archive State Agency has three main archives, and it also lists the territorial archival departments. Family Search has a small amount of records that have been digitized and are online to view. For example, civil registration for the district of Sofia from 1893 to 1912. There are various military records as well as an index of the Bulgarian Jews in 1913. There are records kept at an individual provincial governments rather than the main archive. And unfortunately, really old records are likely to be stored in the Ottoman Empire archives in Turkey or Greece. This is a difficult country to get records from, so get as much information as you can from your living relatives. The Czech Republic. In the late 9th century, the Duchy of Bohemia was formed. During the 1500s, it was integrated in the Habsburg monarchy along with Austria and Hungary. After the 30 years, the Habsburg consolidated all the areas, abolished the Protestant religion in favor of the Catholic. They also started Germanization. Sounds like a disease, but anyway. In 1806, it became part of the Austrian Empire, and after World War I, became the Republic of Czechoslovakia. Some ideas where you can start your research. Acta Publica, digitized parish books known as Matriki. Some are online, and the website is in Czech, English, and German. These links should all be on your handouts. Family Search has converted a variety of records online for free access. Such records include censuses from 1843 to 1921, civil registers from 1874 to 1937, as well as land records, church records. There are also church books from 1552 to 1963 with images. Many of these are digitized but not indexed. Do your search on the country or province to narrow down results. You would need to scroll through these images very much like you did when the microfilms were in the Family History Center if you ever went to them, except that now you can do it from your own home on your PC for a lot of the films. Some are still restricted and can only be seen from a Family History Center. If your Family History Center is closed down, find out if your local library has an affiliated machine. At the National Archives, there are Jewish records. Over 4,000 volumes are held from 1784 to 1949. Also, a Prague population registration and conscription from 1850 to 1914 are being worked on, and new records are added every now and then. For records that you are not able to find, you would need to do research in the National Archives. All records have been consolidated, and records from before 1900 are held in the state regional archives. These records are available for researchers by writing or by personally visiting them. The only records available by mail are parish registers of birth, marriages, and deaths. Other records like land records and census records do exist, and you can use them if you visit the archives yourself or hire someone who is there and can do the research for you. It can be a challenge, but it is rewarding. Hungary. Hungary followed a similar route to the Czech Republic. Hungary was established also in the 9th century when Prince Arpad invaded the area. King St. Stephen I converted the country to Christianity, and by the 15th century, the country had reached its golden era. Later, the Habsburgs took over, and it became part of Austro-Hungarian Empire until the First World War. The Hungarian Archives portal is in Hungarian, English, and German. It holds 7 different archives and covers varied databases, photos, postcards, school registers, maps, civil lawsuits, to mention a few. Once you drill down on these records, you will find that they're only in Hungarian. The Kolkata Archdiocesan Archives church books are currently in southern Hungary and northern Serbia. Archives Portal Europe, the information on archival material from Hungary and other archival institutions throughout Europe. Family Search also holds church records, transcripts of Jewish records, and many censuses records for the areas within the modern borders of Hungary that were microfilmed in the 1960s. Civil registration began in 1895. These records were kept at local civil registrar's offices in town halls. For a few counties, the civil registration records through to 1910 have also been microfilmed. Information from the civil registration can be obtained by writing to the Hungarian embassy. Slovakia. During the 5th and 6th centuries, the Slavs invaded the area that is now known as Slovakia, and they played a huge part in the creation of the empires that followed. By the 10th century, the area was incorporated into the Kingdom of Hungary, and it remained with Hungary till World War I. After World War I, the Slovaks and Czechs created Czechoslovakia. During World War II, a separate Slovak Republic was created as a client state of Nazi Germany. After the war, it fell back into Czechoslovakia, and in 1993 became an independent state after the Velvet Divorce, a dissolution of Czechoslovakia. Before 1895, registers can be located at the archives in Bratislava. After 1895, the church records are kept by the parish or the bishop's archives. You may be lucky and find some at the state archives. Civil records are kept by the branch offices of the state archives. You can find plot records, census records, and most detailed one is from 1869, lists of taxpayers and a Jewish census of 1848. Most of Eastern Slovakia is already filmed and in the Family Search catalogue. The collection continues to grow, but until records are listed in the catalogue, they are not available. The Slovak Archives also provides a research service which is especially helpful when the records you need haven't yet been filmed. All records of genealogical value in Slovakia were nationalized. Records from before 1900 are kept in state regional archives, and these records are accessible by writing or in person. The archival administration will arrange for searches of records such as birth, marriage, and death registers before 1900. They will send your request for research to the appropriate archive in Slovakia. Belarus. Various states such as the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Russian Empire, and so on, controlled the land of Belarus right up to the 20th century. It never really was its own country. It is now. Then after the Russian Revolution, it was taken by Soviet Russia. In 1991, Belarus declared independence. Family Searchers acquired some microfilmed records from archives in Grodno and Minsk for Belarus. There's a fair amount that has been indexed and can be found online. However, the indexing is incomplete. They also mention the Polish archives, and a number of records can be found there, dependent on the time and place of the event. The National Archives of Belarus have an English site, which is rather useful. Currently, they have information on parish registers, census records, and records of nobility. So do you have any blue blood? I don't. Not yet, anyway. The Russian Federation, also known as Russia, and as you can see, she is huge. So a little piece of her falls into Eastern Europe, and the rest Asia can have. The medieval state of Rus droned up in the 9th century, and in 988 it adopted Orthodox Christianity from the Byzantine Empire. The Russian Empire grew and expanded into the third largest empire in history. The Russian Revolution changed the face of Russia, and the world wars both played a decisive role in her history, allowing her to emerge as a superpower and remain so for many years during the Cold War. Family Search microfilming began many years ago. Not all areas are represented in the collection of the catalogue. There are, as yet, no significant Jewish records in the collection. Some genealogical researchers are interested in the records of the German colonists who settled in Russia and the Ukraine. The transcripts of these records of Protestant communities in the Ukraine, Belarus, and the vicinity of St. Petersburg are stored at the Lutheran Consistory in St. Petersburg. These records have been microfilmed. Moldova. I always thought Moldova was a fictional country where, you know, the prince married the princess and things like that. Obviously, I was mistaken until I started digging into Eastern Europe. Anyway, Moldova was a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire, which ceded it to the Russian Empire in 1812. During the Russian Revolution, it became independent. However, this did not last long, as she was then integrated into Romania, who in turn handed it back to Russia in 1940. It's like playing past the parcel. In 1991, she became independent again. Moldova was also known as Bessarabia, while it belonged to Russia. Microfilming has begun for Moldova. There are church books from 1811 to 1936, but are image only. There's also a Moldavia Vital Records database that you can access through Jewish Gen. Unfortunately, not much more information is held. However, records should also be with Russia and Romania as well. Moldova has close cultural ties with Romania. For records not filmed, try writing to the Moldavian State Archives. Poland. The beginning of the state of Poland can be traced back to 966 AD, when Mieszko converted to Christianity. In 1025, the Kingdom of Poland was founded, and in 1569 it was signed the Union of Lublin with the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and thus became one of the largest Commonwealth areas. During the late 1800s, the partitions of Poland happened, and she only regained her independence in 1918. After World War II, she became a satellite state under Soviet influence and became a democracy in 1989. At Family Search, you can find many church records and civil transcripts of church records from Poland that have been microfilmed. In many cases, however, they are filmed up to the 1880s. Later records need to be obtained in writing. You can often get information writing in Polish directly to the Catholic parish in the town where your ancestor lived. I'm sure you're thinking now, you don't know any Polish, how are you going to write that letter? Well, for all the countries, Family Search have a specimen letters in the various languages that you can use as templates. For non-Catholics, or when you receive no response from the church, you can write to the Polish State Archives. And just while I'm talking about the Family Search templates, as I said earlier, I'm busy looking into Croatia at the moment for records. And I used one of their templates for Croatia and emailed it to the state archives in Croatia. I had a reply from them within 10 minutes, giving me the price list of the type of research that I need, and that, of course, all in Croatian. So Google Translate and me were best friends this afternoon, but they're responding. So there is hope. Romania. Oh, my grandmother loved pulling her mouth up to expose her Dracula teeth, and told me that she came from Transylvania. The Kingdom of Dracula was formed in 168 BC, and in 106 AD, the Romans conquered the kingdom and over the next 200 years, it became the Principality of Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania. In 1181, they became the Kingdom of Romania, and then the famous or infamous Ottoman Empire took over, and independence was finally regained in 1878. After World War II, she became a socialist republic and started moving towards democracy in 1989. Family Search does not have a lot on Romania. Civil registration began in the Kingdom of Romania in 1865, the Hungarian Empire in 1895, and in Austria only after World War II. More current civil registrations are kept in city and town halls. Each religious denomination maintained its own set of records and continued to keep their own records after 1895, but were no longer required to do so by the civil authorities. It's virtually impossible to get copies. However, early civil registration has been transferred to state archives. Religious vital records and transcripts created for civil authorities can be found in the archives. Romania has 43 archive branches, one for each județ or district, plus a central archive and municipality archive in Bucharest. Boundaries of these districts at the archives do not necessarily match the historical boundaries for the areas that used to belong to Hungary. Determining where the records of a particular village might be located might require understanding of the boundary changes. Records in Western Romania and Transylvania are normally in Hungarian or sometimes in German, and elsewhere they may be in Romanian and sometimes in the Cyrillic script. I do know of a friend of mine who has been able to get records out of Romania, so they are opening up and starting to help. Ukraine. The Middle Ages found this area to be a hive of Slavic culture, with a loose federation of Kievan Rus until it split in the 13th century. Everyone wanted a slice of the pie: Lithuania, Poland, Austria-Hungary, Ottomans, and even Russia. During the 17th and 18th century, the area was ruled by a Cossack republic, but once again was split between Poland and Russia in 1919. Then in 1940, she was swallowed by Russia. In the 20th century, during the two world wars, the Ukraine remained independent. However, after World War II was taken into Russia. Independence was finally declared in 1991. Family Search have ongoingly been acquiring microfilms from the Ukraine. There are various records that have been digitized but not yet indexed, or the index is incomplete. There are records from the Germans from Russia, Jewish records, and also military records. For records not yet filmed, contact the archives. Okay, Family Search. Family Search. Anybody, now this is a site where I can wax lyrical about. It is one of my favorite sites. Something to bear in mind is that anyone can make changes to your tree. So if you do have a tree with them, make sure you mark watch on your ancestors, so you are notified every time something is changed. But these changes could also be an upside, as it might be a distant cousin or family member that has something that you have been searching for. From any of the family history centers, you can have access to all the records and public family trees that are held at Ancestry, My Heritage, as well as Find My Past. Now, I know in Burlington, the Family History Center has actually closed down. I know this is something that the LDS Church was looking at doing for all the centers. I don't know how many have closed, but the libraries now know that Oakville Library has got a machine that is affiliated to Family Search, and you can do your searches through the library for the Family History Center. You can also, at the library, you get Ancestry as well. New archived records from around the world are published on the Family Search website every week to help you find your ancestors. There are over 6 billion searchable historic records available from around the world on Family Search. Records are published with the help of thousands of volunteer indexers who transcribe digital copies of handwritten records to make them easily searchable online. Just need to also mention here, being one of the indexers that transcribes the digital copies of handwritten records, that we are human, we make mistakes, and I have found that people have digitized my surname in more ways than I can count because of the writing and how to read it. But it's fun. It's interesting what you can find there. Right. Do you belong to any genealogical society or groups? To me, these are all extremely helpful. You never know, you might meet your distant cousin who has the family Bible, or find photos that you never knew about and stuff. I join as many as I can, especially when I'm researching for customers. I had a client who, her family in Canada, who her family came from Cumbria in the UK. So I found them, I joined them for just 10 British pound. And that 10 British pound paid for an amazing amount of information and help that these members gave me. These members live there and they have the same passion as us. They are, as what Steve would say, the boots on the ground. The majority of the societies really don't charge much to join. And I always find that they've got really helpful articles that can help you with your research. Right, now I've given you a lot of information. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming to listen to me drone on for 45 odd minutes. And do you have any questions? Is anybody out there?
Grant, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I did. It's, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm working from an iPad and it wanted to sign me off, so there we go. There's a couple of things, Eva, that got posted on the chat.
Okay.
Just let me go back and locate them. That were early on. We had Barbara Bodner ask a couple of questions, and you may well have answered them. Have most church records, example Ukrainian Catholic, been preserved in Berlin, or were they lost in the war?
It depends which year you're looking for.
Okay, Barbara does not specify that. All right. Okay. Oh, we got a new message down the bottom in here.
Okay.
Oh, it's a little. Sorry, I'm a little
All
bit
right.
slow at this.
So it depends entirely on the area and the year that we're looking at. So if Barbara wants to email me, my address is on the screen there, eva.kujawa@gmail.com. I can certainly look into it and help her with that. That's not a problem.
Okay. Here you go, Barbara. And we had one other question from Pat Harmon. And and I'm just going to read this literally because I think there might be a spelling error in here, Eva.
That's fine.
Where does Slovenia fall in Eastern European records? Records I show Austria, Yugoslavia, Slovenia for the same place.
It will be, again, it's dependent on the years that she's looking for. So the best would be to see where the borders and where the town was. So it would be, depending on the year range, it would fall most probably into any one of those countries. If the town is, say, for example, now in Slovenia, then the best is to go to their archives and ask them, because they would most probably retain all the records. And it depends if you're looking for church records or civil records.
All right, there you go, Pat. It sounds like you have, let's say, a sleuthing job to do.
Or email me and I'll try and help you the best I can.
Okay. Where can I find East Prussian records from around Conningsburg, now Kaliningrad?
Oh, okay. So, yes. So, depending on the religion, if it was the Lutheran, if they were Lutheran or Protestant, then there is a portal called Archeon, which is AR, I'll put it in the chat. Chat. It's Archeon. In Germany, those are all the Lutheran church records that are held in Berlin. And they have a lot of the Eastern Prussian records in there. It is a pay site, so you do have to pay, and it is in German. If you need any help with that, email me. I speak and understand German. Both my parents were German before I found out that they were actually Eastern European.
Thank you, Eva, for that answer. Are there any more questions you want to pose? Oops, here we got one from Evelyn here. Hold on. Takes a while to pop up on one of, I have two screens going here and only one of them seems to be reacting right away. What's going on here? Yeah, one of them. Evelyn, I can see your question is not popping up.
Maybe we can ask Evelyn to actually unmute and talk.
That's probably the best way to do. Go ahead, Evelyn.
Grant, I only sent it to you, so maybe that's...
Oh, okay. That's what's happening here. Okay. I'll have to poke my screen and and figure it out here.
Go
I'm
ahead.
not a fan of iPads, but it's the only thing I've got with a microphone right now. Oh,
Let Evelyn just ask the question out loud.
yep. I think that's the best thing to do, Evelyn.
Okay, Eva, I have a lot to learn about this area. It is something that we didn't study much in school, I have to say.
No.
And it's my husband's side of the family. And I wonder if you have a favorite source of general histories, something like we might get in high school or even public school, or any good historical fiction. You know, like sometimes you can learn a lot from a well-written historical novel, you know? Yeah.
So I must admit, I tend to read a lot of Wikipedia. I go and read on the countries there, and then I go down to the sources where they get the information from. And then I look up the sources and I see what I can find on Google Books in way of history. So there isn't, unfortunately, I have been looking for a history book that will cover the whole of Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, I have yet to find some. Oh, hang on. I did found something in Kindle Unlimited, but I haven't looked at it closely. They had a whole lot of different histories of all over the place. They had one for Eastern Europe. So I've actually downloaded it last week and I haven't looked at it. So you can look on like Kindle Unlimited if you've got Kindle, or even through Google Books for Eastern European history. I found that I get it in bits and pieces of the countries, and it's not really overall. A lot of my history comes from researching each country. So like at the moment I'm doing Croatia and I'm finding a lot about Croatia and going through records of Croatia and the Gazetteers and stuff. So I'm starting to build up. That's for my next presentation when I go more in depth into the countries that, then I build up what I've got there. But unfortunately, there isn't anything specific that I can recommend at the moment, except for maybe that Kindle book.
Thank you.
Okay, that's just to summarize there. You use the sources at the bottom of Wikipedia and Google Books and a few other places to broaden your knowledge.
And Kindle books.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Any other questions for Eva? Meyer, if you send me your email address, it's in the chat, my email address, I can get the handouts to you. They're also within this chat. Where do you find the gazetteers for a country, Eva?
Which country?
Well, that's just the general question. It's come in from Michelle.
Okay, so there are a few. So the one for like Austria, there is an Austrian gazetteer. If you give me 2 ticks, I will find the link. I don't believe I have put it on the handout.
With all this subject matter you've covered tonight, we almost want to read the handouts again and have you do it all over again. So there's just so much there.
Well, I mean, we've got the Facebook group. It's called Eastern European Seg-Ontario Ancestors. It's a public group. Anybody is more than welcome to join. You don't have to belong to the OGS or anything like that, or to our Seg. And you're welcome to ask questions there. Besides myself, I know that a lot of other girls including Elaine, are more than happy to help and answer questions. I know that there is an Austrian-Hungary Gazetteer, but I'm trying to find it.
Eva, would it be in family search under the
Yes.
country plus the name genealogy? And then there's that lovely box on the side that has Gazetteers in
Yeah,
it.
if you, okay, so I use family search for the family search wiki for everything. I've just put in a link for the Austro-Hungarian page where you can just read through it and it'll tell you where to go. But really, family search wiki is one of my best research helpers. It's amazing the information that they've got, and that information keeps on being updated. So, and then the books that I was talking about, they are done by Captivating History. And they should be, so you get, like, they've got a whole lot of them. They've got the Habsburg Empire, the history of Thailand, Germania, Korean War, all sorts of books there. And I just downloaded them the other week, so I haven't looked into them. But I mean, like the one for Romania, it says the history of Romania, captivating guide to the Romanian history, including events such as the First Roman-Dracian War, raids of Vlad III Dracula against the Ottoman Empire, the Great War, and the World War II. So there's a whole lot of them that you can download, including William the Conqueror and Germania, and those are the ones that I've just recently downloaded.
Thank you.
Books are by, they call it Captivating History. The only other books that I've got about the history of Europe are in German, that I managed to find in a German bookshop and that had more on the Prussian side.
Eva, could you type into the chat the name of that Eastern European SIG in Facebook for us? I see I've got a request for that.
Yes. Let me give you the link. I think that'll just be easier.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's the wrong one. Sorry. What happened there? That's better. Okay, that link should take you straight through to our Facebook group.
Okay. And Rick is asking me, is there a way to find transport of Ukrainians to the port leaving to Canada? So I presume he's looking for where did they leave from the Ukraine, or what records might exist there?
Okay, so a lot of the Eastern European people would have gone, again, dependent on the time. If it was just after World War II and that, they would have most probably gone to the nearest port to the village that had overseas, or they would go to surrounding countries. I know that a lot of people left from Italy. A lot of people went to England and then left from Liverpool. A lot of people left from Hamburg and from Rotterdam in Holland. So wherever there's a port where there were ships that were going, there are websites where you can look at all the ships that went to North America during certain years. You just need to Google in, say, for example, ships that went to the US from Eastern Europe. So, but all the main harbors would have had people go.
Yeah, Rick was particularly thinking of the 1900 to 1915 period of people leaving Ukraine. So they might well have come through places like Hamburg, I would think,
Yes, they would have.
overland.
For them, it was easier to go overland and, you know, and then, you know, go from Germany or from Holland.
Eva,
Yes.
your links that haven't shown up in the chat for everyone. I'm not sure where you sent
Oh,
them.
okay, sorry.
That's
Somehow
okay.
I had
Just
a
thought I'd
went
mention it.
to- Sorry, everybody in meeting. That's my bad.
There we are, I see it.
Sorry, I was
Okay,
sending them
so-
to Rick. Somehow or other I changed it to Rick instead of everyone.
Ah,
Oh,
I've done that before.
Google Books is also a good one to just go and type in your ancestor's name and see what kind of hits you get. I found my 3 times great-grandfather as a pharmacist in Google Books.
Now,
wow.
Eva,
Yes.
have you used My Heritage? Because my understanding is they've got deeper record coverage for Europe and presumably some Eastern Europe too.
So okay, so we have the 3 biggest companies that do this is the 2 paying ones, which is Ancestry and My Heritage, and then we've got Family Search. Ancestry, the records are, Ancestry, the records are more North American based and people in North America because it's more of a North American product. And it was raised there and it was really pushed in North America. Whereas My Heritage really, it started off in Israel. It's a Jewish company and it started pushing out, and only over the years has it gotten bigger. So yes, there is a lot more European records or family trees, because you must remember that they're family trees. They do have records, for which they have made agreements, just like Ancestry and Family Search, with other archives and that, to show the records on their sites, for which we then pay. So yes, if you're looking for Europe, I found that in My Heritage, I get a lot more hits than I do on Ancestry. Totally. And they are both great for the 2 areas. Obviously, Ancestry is going to start getting more European, and My Heritage is going to get more North American because they're starting to cross over.
Yes.
Especially with COVID, everybody's looking everywhere. So those are the 2 biggest ones. Family Search is free. The big difference with Family Search is that they have been going in and microfilming records since before World War II. And they have millions and millions of records. Now, not everything is indexed, and even all the microfilms and that haven't been digitized as yet. That's all happening. They're hoping to have all their films at least digitized next year.
We've lost the connection, Eva. Your
So we
voice
would
all
all
broke
be-
up.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
We had a pause there.
Okay, sorry about that.
It's okay.
So with Family Search, you can get the records. Not everything has been digitized as yet, but by 2022, they should have digitized most, if not all, of their microfilms. Obviously, with Family Search, whatever you find there is free. With Ancestry and My Heritage, you've got to pay prices. Doesn't mean that they've got all the records. I found that especially with Eastern Europe, your best bet is, and I've looked on, because I belong to Ancestry and My Heritage and all of them, and my best bet has always been to actually write to the church in the village or town where my ancestor came from, or to the state archives. And they will then, the state archives, like the ones in Croatia today, they've sent me the price list, and they're charging me, I think it's 80 Croatian thing, which is like 20 Canadian cents for half an hour's research.
Ooh,
It's like nothing,
yeah.
you know. And what they'll do is you send them the details, they'll go see what they can find, they'll come back and tell you, well, it's going to take so long for us to do it, and you then send them the money, they go and they do and send it to you. That's really, you know, once you convert it to their currency, it's like paying peanuts, unless you're paying in euro. Once it starts in euro, then it gets a bit more. But I find that all the ones that I've gotten hold of, and from what I can remember, even Elaine said that when she got hold of the ones in Romania, she's had luck with them. So, you know, and I mean, I got a reply within like 15, 20 minutes. I was absolutely gobsmacked.
Yes.
You know, I just couldn't believe that they'd replied so quickly and send me a price list. And, you know, with the greatest of pleasure, they'll do the research and get the copies for me.
Wow.
Okay, can I just
Wow.
tell a hint to everybody? We've got some good links in the chat. At the bottom of your chat window, there should be 3 dots on the very bottom right. If you click on that, there should be a save chat option, and that will put a text file on your computer, probably in a file called Zoom in your C drive. And that way you don't have to scribble down the URLs and maybe make a mistake.
That's great. Thanks, Nancy. I did not know that. We've got one other question come in, Eva.
Yes.
And let's see, just moved up. Carol writes, I understand that people use trains to move from their hometown to seaports. Do train passenger lists exist?
No. So no, unfortunately not. In those days, you just went and bought a ticket and got onto a train and went. I find that a lot of people, especially in the 1800s and stuff, trains were expensive. My 3 times great-grandfather walked from Conningsburg to a town in Germany for a job that he saw advertised in a newspaper. So a lot of them walked or rode horses and carriages to you know, get where they wanted to. So because trains were expensive in those days, as trains got more cheaper, they did use them, and they used them often to get into where they were going. But unfortunately, there's nothing like the ships and stuff. There's no manifest, no train lists or anything. Wish there was. It would help immensely, but no.
And I think the same thing holds true in Canada here. They would sell you a ticket, and if they didn't have enough space on the train, they stuck another car on and you went on the train.
Yeah.
And so they didn't really care about keeping lists and trying to figure out whether the train was full or not. They had enough coaches and they just made a bigger train.
Yeah. I think because trains became really such a common mode of transport, not like ships and planes, that, you know, you would catch it from one town to the next like you would catch a bus.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's another, you know, buses were also a big mode of transport in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Grant?
Yes.
It's Judy.
Okay. Go ahead.
We were wondering about, my cousin had checked in Halifax, and apparently, well, the question is, are all ship passenger lists for Eastern Canadian ports, can they be accessed in Halifax Pier 21 now?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I know when I was down there a number of years ago, I looked up my grandfather. He did not arrive at Halifax, and I think I found him, but I honestly don't know. We'll throw that out to the group.
I would thought that would have been Library and Archives Canada
Yeah, I was just going to say the same.
after 1865.
Mm. Before 1865, there's very, very little. You'll be lucky if you find anything. There are some that are out, but there's not a lot.
Yeah, at that time, I think if you showed up on board a ship, they just took you on as cargo.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Pretty much, right? So they were happy to move you and pay the fee. They didn't really care a whole lot.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, you know,
Thank you.
North America didn't care either at that stage because they just wanted people coming in so that they could, you know, populate and grow the economy. So it didn't bother them, you know, who or what was coming till later.
Yeah, in many respects, we just needed bodies to
That's
chop
it.
wood and build railways and canals and clear land.
Yeah, you needed the
Yeah.
manpower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like any country, you know, that's being colonized, needed the manpower. So it didn't matter what was being coming in, you know.
Oh.
The other question that I have, it's Judy again, is grandfather on my mother's side. Most of our relatives, both on my mother and father's side, were from the Ukraine, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. And they ended up in Manitoba. And I know that the majority of Eastern Europe seem to have gone to Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And the grandfather, great-grandfather, had a university a university degree from the States. So this would have been back in the early 1900s. So how do you search that? We're not quite sure. We think it was the University of Chicago, but we're not really that sure. So going to the university is one avenue. Is there some other way of looking at that aspect of it? Because it was pretty unusual for somebody to have a degree in those early years.
Nancy?
Any thoughts?
Certain records.
Unless you're lucky enough to find a university school book, there's no central anywhere, or if it's mentioned in an obituary where he ended up, I don't know. You've got me on that one. How about you, Eva?
Well, I'm thinking newspapers. You know, I don't know if something like that would have been newsworthy. Round about what year was it, Judy?
I can't say right now. I don't have it in front of me. It's enough to screencast and use my tablet at the same time. But the information has been great, so I'm sorry it's not in front of me. Unless my cousin wants to email that if she's still in.
My first response is Google the year and University Chicago and the name and see what you can find. Every couple of months I've got a list and I go through Google and I put in all the names of my ancestors, and you'll be surprised what sometimes comes up of the people that I'm researching. And you can put alerts out as well on Google. So, but that's another thing where you can, every time something appears with a name, it'll alert you and say this article or whatever has appeared with this name.
Oh,
Um,
great, thank you.
I checked that the University of Chicago was actually formed at the time you think your ancestor was there too. Get the history of the university.
yeah.
Any other questions for Eva? Nothing in the chat? Well, Eva, that was quite a conversation you had with us tonight.
Well, I
And
hope
I,
you at least learned something, or you know where we are if you need us.
I just think about those political changes and the language and whatnot. And my family's mostly from the UK. It makes my search look like a hot knife through butter, really, compared to what many other people are having to deal with. I guess I have no complaints when I can't get back more than 7 generations, really. It's my own issue, right? I'm not dealing with the language.
Well,
Kind of
every
thing.
time I want to break, I do my ex-husband's side, who's all British and English, and or I've even done my brother-in-law's, you know, family history in Scotland, and I just find people in England or United States to do, and then when I've, you know, had a bit of success there, then I come back to Eastern Europe and tackle head on to see what I can find.
Yeah.
There is,
Well,
I mean, it's a lot more harder to get information and things like that. I find the Eastern Bloc countries are now starting to open up and get used to the family history and things like that. So it, you know, it's starting to open doors. So for us that have been researching for a long time, you know, it's frustrating, but they're only opening their doors now. It's taken them 20 years to try and get some sense of order in these countries that were all communistic, and it's very different. And I mean, I've been to Romania a couple of times in the early 2000s, and they're still, a lot of them, and I've got friends that still live there, are still very much third worldish. You know, they're still trying to get to this kind of state that we are in, and we've got to remember that in the background. You know, they don't have as much internet access and everything like that, although it's a lot better now than it was 10, 15 years ago. And we are getting, like, today's response just absolutely threw me out of my chair, because I didn't think I'd hear that from them for at least a week. And to have a reply within 15 minutes was just like, wow, you know, which was absolutely brilliant. So they are definitely starting to respond. The language barrier is huge, but we've got Google Translate. It's not perfect, but it does a reasonably good job.
Well,
So I wish everybody good luck. So all of us.
I think you've given us hope, Eva.
Good, I'm
I
glad.
want to, again, Eva, I want to thank you for taking the time to make this presentation. And I know it's late over there, and I'm certainly looking forward to the presentation you'll give in the fall time, the continuation
You're
of
more than
this. So
welcome. I absolutely
you.
love it. Feels as if I've still got one foot back home in Canada, so it's great.
That's good. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. And I'm going
All
to
right.
leave now because I'm going to go to bed.
Yes.
Okay,
We
we'll
have-
let you go to bed.
Take
All
care.
right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Now, there was some discussion about the Uxbridge people continuing on with our meeting, because normally we would have a discussion at the beginning, but we let Eva in. I don't know how many Uxbridge people are still around. Maybe you could turn off the recording there, Nancy,
Yeah, I'm just
fiddling.
trying to bring my screen back up.
Yeah, we're sharing a screen. I guess it's your screen.
Yeah.